All right, now let's talk about adding inputs into vMix. There's a lot that you can do editing inputs inside of vMix and adding them into vMix. So let's get started. Now, as you know from our last video, all of the inputs inside of vMix are organized down at the below the preview and output windows. So as you add more and more inputs, they're all organized down here. Every input has a number. They just go sequential, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As you move inputs, they change numbers. So it really is an organization of, sequential inputs inside of vMix all down here. We also looked at organizing our inputs with these tabs here in the last video. And I'm going to go ahead, I got a camera input now. This is an NDI camera that we'll take a peek at. And I'm going to go ahead and put that into this camera input area that we already designed in our input categories. We did this by right-clicking the tabs and then putting the names in there. So just to give you an idea of how we've been kind of organizing our inputs, and organization is key as your video productions get more and more advanced. So when I click on this left-hand tab, that gives me all of the inputs we have in our project so far. And we're going to go ahead and dig into some of the important parts of inputs. Now, when we add an input, we do that by clicking that bottom right button down here. And we add an input, we have a lot of different options. You can see that these are organized in tabs. So we've got tabs for video, DVD. We can add a list of inputs. This is a great one where you can actually add an entire list of videos and it gives you a complete playlist. In fact, this is a fun one. I'll add a few videos that I have just from different projects that I've been working on. And you can see here, that is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 videos, or 6 videos. And I can add that whole list of videos and actually get a little controller here of which one that I'd like to play inside of that list. So pretty cool. We'll take a look at that as well in this course. Now, going down the list, we have cameras, and all of the different cameras that you have access to are available here. So you've got all these different cameras, and a lot of times you have different options inside of the input as you add them. So for example, if I add, let's say this is a PTZ Optics webcam, I can choose how vMix brings it in. And instead of 1920 by 1080, maybe I want 1280 by 720. Maybe I want to select the frame rate. Now, it does depend on the capture device you're using if that will work or not, but generally you can decide whether maybe I don't want any audio coming from this webcam. It's just a secondary camera. I don't want to deal with the audio. So there's a lot of different options as you add inputs from the very beginning before it even gets into vMix as an input of how you're going to bring it in. NDI is a great way to bring in video. We're going to be talking all about that. But for example, we can just bring in an NDI camera. We've got a lot of them out here. I've actually got one outdoors that's kind of cool. We can choose a low bandwidth mode, for example, audio only mode. We can increase the buffer size. So we've got all these different options for bringing in inputs, and we'll talk a little bit more on NDI. Next to NDI, there's a button that's desktop capture. This will allow us to capture any window or basically application on our computer. Next, we have stream, and this is the ability to bring in live video streams, whether it be over RTSP or UDP or VLC. So I don't have VLC installed on my computer, so that one actually doesn't work. But that actually allows you to bring in RTMP video feeds as well. You can bring in all of those streams. Instant replay is something that's a little bit more advanced. We will talk about instant replay in this online course, but essentially you can bring in multiple cameras, record them all, and then play back the video in slow motion in an instant replay setup. Another thing we have here is called a stinger, and we will look at stingers. In fact, I do have a stinger that we'll look at in this course. And that's what vMix video tools are used for, is to create image sequences that create really fancy animated transitions. So we will look at that in this course as well. You can add a video delay as well. That's great for delaying video to sync up with other sources as necessary. You can add images, so just any image. You can add a slideshow of images. You can add a PowerPoint. You can add an input that's just any color, and that can be nice as a backdrop as you're mixing other video and audio sources together. You can bring in any audio input. So literally any MP3 or WAV file, for example, for audio effects. Audio inputs are actual microphones. So an audio microphone or an audio mixer that you want to add to your audio mixer for part of your mix. We have titles, and these are all of the different titles that are available inside of vMix. We can bring in Flash. We can bring in virtual sets, which we will talk about. Virtual sets are one of my favorite parts of vMix. This vMix is running a little slow because it's got a lot going on here, but that is the virtual sets. We can bring in a web browser. This is a great one. Why don't we just test this here? We'll just go to vmix.com and click OK. And that will bring in any website. And that's one that I think we should take a peek at as well. So we'll bring in that as an example. And then here's that. So you can see here in the preview, maybe I'll fade it to the output. But in the preview side, you can actually right-click it and decide whether you want to enable your keyboard, go back and forward, or reload the page. So we can actually go navigate websites in the preview. Not in the output side, but in the preview side, we can use this side to navigate. And I can click that back button, go backwards and forwards, and there's even a little bar here for going, up and down inside of web pages. And then the final one was the vMix call. And that is a video call option. You can actually host a video call. Now check the addition on how many you can use here, but you can add that directly to your vMix setup, copy this link, and you can send it to anyone and bring them into your video production. That does require the 64 version of vMix, which I'm not running. So there we go. Now, inside of each input, there is the ability to click the cog button, and that will open up this input area. Now, this is where you can really start mixing and matching inputs together. So we're going to take a peek at this in more detail. So first of all, you should try to give your inputs a name. I'm going to call this the BTS, which stands for behind the scenes. And you're actually seeing the main vMix computer that I'm using. So this will be kind of interesting. I'll pan and tilt this camera a little bit. You can see me over here in the corner, and we'll take a look. But you can see right off the bat that you can see your resolution and your frame rate and a bunch of different settings. When we click this audio settings option, it opens the audio for that input. So we're going to cover audio in more detail, but that is a quick way to do it. You can create a virtual input of any input, which is really nice, especially if you want to have like a full screen input and then a different one that's the same. So let's create a virtual input of this one, and we'll take a peek at that, the difference there. So on the virtual one, and I don't want to get too crazy, but let's just say in the virtual one, I can either use the source settings, so the main source that this virtual one was created from, or I could maybe say, hey, I like that a little darker, and I'm going to do a little bit of color correction on this one, but still keep the main one separate and kind of compare and contrast them. So that's like one way you could use virtual inputs. I use virtual inputs all the time. But going down this, we have the color adjust. So we can color adjust any input, the red, green, blue, saturation. Black stretch is something I add all the time just to kind of bring the blacks out. And white stretch, if it's a little too dark, make it a little lighter. And we can even adjust the alpha channel, which would affect how transparent it is. The color key is used for green screens. So we'll look at green screens in our virtual set tutorial, but we can use this Droppler to chroma key out a specific color. Color correction is something that we definitely need to cover in an upcoming video because of how complicated it is. It's very powerful and nice to have, but we're not going to cover it here just because of how in-depth that will need to be. Now, the position of the input allows you to kind of virtually pan, tilt, and zoom the input. So maybe, we want it to, we'll take a look at this in the multi-view area as well, but maybe we just want to show a side-to-side, shot of this. It's a really nice tool that we can reset, reframe, and use all over. Now, in the multi-view area, this is something, again, we will cover in more detail, but just to give you an idea, imagine that you have the ability to kind of position a lot of different views together. And this is another one that does require a whole nother tutorial on, but just check out just a little look at what you could possibly do here, kind of reorganizing. And what we're doing here is this entire input now has these pieces as part of it. So you can see here, if I zoom out, that this entire input has these inputs attached to it now. It's not the same as this virtual input that we didn't use the multi-view on with overlay channels. Those are different. So we'll talk about overlay channels in an upcoming video, and we're going to talk about multi-views in the upcoming video as well. So I'm not going to cover this in too much detail, but that's how that works. We have the ability to set up triggers, tally lights, and PTZ cameras. All of those things are going to be reviewed in more detail, but just to give you a tiny view here, I'm going to get rid of these overlays, and I'm just going to quickly show you that I'm over here on this computer using a different version of vMix that you're seeing in a desktop capture. Oop. And down here is the vMix that's actually recording everything. All right. That's a quick overview of the recording features inside of vMix. Let's go on to our next video.